Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. My name's Gretchen, and today I'm back with another Women's Prize for Fiction Longlist review, and today's pick is The Blue Beautiful World by Karen Lord. And this book, there's a couple things to mention about this book before we start to get into the review. First and foremost is this is a sci-fi book, and that is not something that I thought that I would see on the Women's Prize for Fiction long list. So that was a little different. I'm not used to reading sci-fi. I'm not averse to it. I will read it, but I have to be in a very specific mood to enjoy sci-fi. I enjoy sci-fi more visually and in movie format, and I don't tend to really like reading sci-fi because I have difficulties understanding a lot of the world building, a lot of the science that goes behind it. I end up reading science fiction and I feel lost the whole time, and I feel dumb. And I constantly find myself looking up things, and it's hard for me to sometimes wrap my head around these worlds and understand exactly what is going on, which leads me to the second point that I want to make about the book. It's part of a series. So there's 2 books prior to this, and this was touted as a standalone. However, I will argue that this is not a standalone, and I started reading this book and I knew that it was a standalone, and I knew that it was sci-fi, which is, like I said, not my typical genre. So I started to read it and I was proud of myself because I'm like, yeah, like I'm understanding what's happening. I'm following along. It doesn't seem to be so science-y that I'm struggling to understand or comprehend, and it's not flying over my head. And then all of a sudden, about halfway through, I just started to get really confused. I was just like reading something and I was like, well, wait, who's that? Or wait, what is that? And I started to question whether or not I missed something in my earlier reading. And I started to go back and I started to waste all of this time going back and seeing if I missed anything and trying to find those things. And I then decided that I was going to start going online and looking at some other reviews to see if maybe I could find a quick overview of some of the previous books to like see if there were any things that were missing. And what I quickly found is that there were a lot of people that were talking about how this is not a standalone, that they had read previous books in the series, and they stated that there are very important things that happen leading up to this book, that in order for the reader to fully comprehend and understand what's going on, they needed to have that foundation. And as soon as I found that out, my interest level for this book just plummeted. I didn't want to continue anymore feeling like I was missing something or I was in the dark. And I was so upset that this was supposed to be a standalone, and it was promised to be a standalone, and it turns out that it wasn't. Now, I understand that having finished the book, I see how there's still a lot of plot and there's still a lot of stuff going on in this book where you could follow along with the story and kind of understand what was happening and what was going on. But why would I want to only half understand something? Why wouldn't I want to have the full story to get everything that I could possibly out of this book? And I really was not happy. I'm not happy with the fact that we have a book here that is part of a series and is not truly a standalone. And I don't know if that was known by the Women's Prize. I mean, I don't know if the people that were judging this read the previous books, and maybe that's why they decided that this was a book that they would longlist, and maybe they felt that it was a standalone, but they had that fundamental knowledge. I have no idea. I don't know how this book made it, and I actually think it's a disservice to the author, because I feel like if I had read the previous two, my rating for this would have been higher. I feel like I would have understood the author's purpose. I feel like I would have just overall enjoyed it more. This book, I hate to say anything negative about it because I don't know the full story, and the only angle that I can come from is a reader that is in the dark about a lot of things that are important to the overall plot and purpose of this book. So I would just say, proceed with caution. If you are not familiar with the previous two books, you are probably going to feel at some point in time lost throughout this book. Now, the story overall, basically, we're in a post-apocalyptic type Earth. Now, once again, were all of the events that happened that led up to that described or covered in the previous two books? I don't know. It was just an assumption that we as a reader had to make, and there was really no explanation as to how we got there. But basically, we are in post-apocalyptic Earth, and we are going through this massive climate crisis, and basically the premise of the book is we have humans on Earth that are prepping to make first contact with aliens from other planets, and there is a heavy element of virtual reality in this book as well. And I appreciated the story. I liked the idea of knowing that first contact was coming and the prep process for how we were going to approach that. And I also found it interesting the people that they got to kind of be our representatives. We had an actress, we had a pop star, so there were also a lot of pop culture and social media references, and it kind of was interesting to see that in the future, those were the types of people that we were depending on to make first contact with aliens. I would think that it would be, more political. I would figure it would be more diplomatic or elected officials that were going to be making contact, but it was interesting, and I appreciated it for its uniqueness. But once again, I just felt so lost. And the other thing that irritated me about this book was I mentioned that it was a standalone, and when you're reading this, you're supposed to be able to read it from start to finish and not need any type of help and have everything that you need at your disposal. And I was confused, like I said, about halfway through when they were mentioning certain planets and certain people and certain things, and I was just confused. Well, then when I got to the end, I realized that there was a glossary back here, the people and places of the Cygnus Beta series. So we have a list of the best of all possible worlds, which was one of the first books, or the first book, and it gives you names of the different planets and the different names for them. And then it's like the visiting mission of the central government of Cygnus Beta. And then it gives you all of the people that were involved with that. And then it gives other characters of note. And then it gives you the galaxy game, and it tells you all of the planets that are involved with that. And then it basically goes chapter by chapter, and it gives you the different characters that are a part of that book, and we learn a little bit more about them. And eventually we get to the Blue Beautiful World, where it does the same thing, and it explains all of the different people and the different characters. So I will be perfectly honest and say that I appreciate that that is in there, but I had no idea it was back there. Unless I am informed that there is information in the back of the book that I need to be aware of, like for example, a footnote in the text that guides me or directs me to the back of the book, I'm not going to the back of the book. I don't want to have anything spoiled for me, so I'm not frequently exploring the book before I start to read it. I just go from the start, and if there's an introduction, I usually skip it until the end because I don't want anything spoiled. But this book, what I think would have been super helpful is at the very beginning, if it told you that that information was in the back of the book, so that if you were wanting to read this as a standalone, you could go to the back and you could read that information. And the other thing is that there are a lot of people that don't necessarily read the actual physical copy of the book. So I'm curious if any of you read the audio or listened to the audio, if maybe that information was provided to you at the beginning of the book, because that could have completely changed my experience of reading the book. And I'm just curious to see how that was handled in the audiobook, if any of you know. Now, I'm still baffled as to how this book made it. And the only thing that I can think of, and I've had such bad luck with these Women's Prize for Fiction books, with the exception of a few, I'm more just trying to dig deep to find out what truly is the reason that these books made it on to the long list. And the only thing that I can think of is Karen Lord. She is, from what I have read, she is kind of a badass. She is an academic. She has her doctorate. She's Barbadian, which is cool. I love reading around the world. And I've read that she is a physicist. I've read that she has like this really cool background, and she's super smart, and she has a lot going on. And I think that, you know, she just seems like a really powerful and put together woman that has a lot going on in her life, and she's super smart, and she brings a lot to the literary world. And maybe that's why this book is being highlighted, because of the talent that she has and the background that she has and all of the work and effort that she's putting into this. The other thing is, obviously, I know that climate science and climate fiction is on the rise, and maybe this was the Women's Prize attempts at modernizing their prize and kind of getting some of those more important, relevant, current event type topics that are in our everyday news and lives in the forefront of some of the books. And I appreciate that, But on the other hand, I think that there were a lot more books out there that could have potentially fit the bill, and especially one that didn't require you having advanced knowledge of what was going on from the previous 2 books. So I will say I kind of struggled with whether or not I'd even give this book a rating, because I don't know how this book would compare if I had read the previous 2 books, but I ended up landing on a 3. I can definitely see its merit, but I will also say that this book seemed a little... When I read science fiction, one of my favorite series is the Broken Earth trilogy by N.K. Jemisin, and that is the type of science fiction that I like to read. This seemed a little bit juvenile. It also seemed like it could be, I questioned whether or not this was YA. I was reading it and I thought this could very well be a YA book. I'm curious to see if anybody else thought that. There really wasn't anything terribly adult in here, and the fact that we're using pop stars and social media influencers and movie actors as our main points of contact with life on other planets, it just seemed a little kitschy. It just seemed a little, like I said, juvenile, and yeah, I was expecting N.K. Jemisin level sci-fi climate fiction, and sadly that was just not what I got. And like I said, I don't want to blame the author for that. I just think that the Women's Prize set us up for thinking that this book was something different than it was, and I ended up just being really disappointed by it. And that could be the book's fault, it could not, but at the end of the day, I just didn't feel like I had the complete story, and it ended up being a letdown for me. So I'm curious to know if you've read this book, what your thoughts were, what your feelings were. Have any of you actually read the first 2 books? And if you did, do you think that I'm being harsh in saying that this is not a standalone, or do you really think that the book could stand on its own without having previous knowledge of the other 2 books? So not a hit for me. I will not be going back and reading the first 2 books, and if there are any additional books that are in this series, I will not be continuing them. I will say though, I am open to reading other books from this author. Her writing was well done. It seemed to be fairly well researched, and she just seems like a very sharp, smart, and observant writer. And if she started a new sci-fi series or any type of series, I would give it a chance. But if I read her again, I'm definitely going to be starting with book 1 and moving forward from there. So we're still plodding along with the Women's Prize for Fiction. This was another dud for me, sadly, but I'm in the process of reading a couple really good ones right now, and things are looking up as far as my enjoyment of the Women's Prize for Fiction, and there's definitely more videos to come. And until we read again, bye.